Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Capel. I'm an IP partner in Husch Blackwell's Healthcare and Life Sciences unit. I have been at Husch Blackwell for over 17 years. I work on tech licensing, software licensing, patents and trademark with a background in chemistry and mathematics. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we begin, I have to take care of a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of the audience console, there are multiple application icons for your use during today's program. If you have any questions during the webcast, please submit them via the question box. We will try to get through all of the answers during the webcast today, but if a full answer is needed, I'll follow up with those at a later time. This program has been approved for legal education hours. For live attendees, report your hours by clicking on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen. A certificate of attendance, including course numbers, will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with a recording of the webcast for watching and sharing. Toward the end of the program, be sure to complete our short survey. We use your feedback to plan future programs that are applicable to your business needs, and we really do look at them and appreciate all of that feedback. That's all for the housekeeping items. Let's go ahead and get started with our program today, discussing AMCs, but also innovation and incubators and how they're driving innovation. So today joining me is Sonia Kim, Jennifer Russell, and Fiolita Kesley. Sonia Kim is the Executive Director at the Croy Incubation Lab, Northwestern's University Incubator that opened at the end of 2022. In her role, she manages the use of a 15,000 square foot physical space, including labs, private offices, startup wet labs, and shared labs, as well as associated programming efforts in the entrepreneur education, venture capital, mentorship engagement, and community support. She develops a collection of resources that support transactional efforts prior to new venture formation, as well as those that support startup leadership and activity. Sonia has been at the Innovation and New Ventures Office at Northwestern for 12 years, and prior to that, she worked for Stanford's Office of Technology Licensing as a science writer and marketing consultant. She's also a former entrepreneur. Did you ever really give that up? And Sonia earned her SB in biology at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a MED from Harvard School of Education, and a PhD in cell biology from Harvard University. Thank you for joining us. Jennifer Russell is a seasoned attorney with over 15 years of in-house counsel experience, specializing in medical device, medical tech, biotech, and pharmaceutical industries. Currently serving as senior counsel at Biotech Law Center in San Diego, she provides fractional in-house counsel services to life sciences companies at various stages of maturity, from startup to publicly traded. In her previous roles, she has been Associate General Counsel and Chief IP Counsel at Surgalign Spinal Technologies and Director of Intellectual Property at NewSuave, Inc. Her practice includes complex business transactions, IP due diligence, transactions in counseling, and private counseling. Fiolita Kesley is PhD, is currently the Chief Technology Officer at Resolute, a startup in Durham, North Carolina. She has extensive experience leading research and development programs for biomaterial-based orthopedic medical devices in both academic and industry settings for 10 plus years. She also served as the Executive Director for Engineering Entrepreneurship at Duke University and led operations for Bridge Startup Incubator and the Duke Fast Track Medical Device Accelerator Program, which collaborated between Pratt School of Engineering and Duke Medical School. She has overseen the technical development of over dozens of medical devices at various stages of transition, from concept to preclinical testing to in-human clinical trials. So as you can tell, a lot of experience to talk about these issues. And so want to get started. First question, we're going to just please, again, if you guys have questions as we're going through, happy to try to pick those up and answer them. So one of the things that we wanted to ask and start with you, Sonia, is talking about what does the academic medical center mean to you in terms, and then how does that differ then from the university side of an incubator or innovation?
Sure. So thank you for the opportunity to join today. So for us, an academic medical center, that's not a term that I necessarily use. At Northwestern, as a university, we sit separately from Northwestern Medicine, which is the hospital system. And so we have different IP policies, and we're completely separate entities. And so the efforts from the university and from the medical center are different. However, I'd say that we really try to engage our physicians regardless of whether or not they are considered faculty members at our university or not. We offer a variety of seminars, which they are always welcome to join. We look for opportunities to pull together funds. For example, we just kicked off a nice program last year with the medical center, with Northwestern Medicine, where we both put in $100K and put together this medical device studio, looking for opportunities for innovation there and getting those to initial prototypes. So that's kind of how we are. I would just put a plug in for Northwestern Medicine themselves. They do have their own Institute of Innovation called the Mansueto Institute, and so they're probably there isn't the IP considerations with the university, but they are trying to innovate as well as a separate institution.
That's great. And so I don't know if Fiolita, you want to talk about how, I think you said that Duke was kind of set up similarly, and then and so did you guys ever find that the kind of the incubator side was working with the physicians, or was there a way to, besides maybe just a joint venture like Sonia just described, is there a way that, you know, the two portions were kind of working together to innovate together?
Yeah, so when I worked at Duke, there was a lot of opportunities for the two sides, the medical side and the engineering side, to work together. There were research funding programs that were geared towards having collaborators from both engineering and medicine. So those gave opportunities for that cross-pollination between the two sides. And then there were also educational programs. So I worked on the Pratt School of Engineering side, so the university side of Duke. But we had like a design health program, for example, where engineering students at various levels, like from bachelor's degree up to PhD, could seek out collaborators with on the medical side. And they would work on projects together for a term to be able to identify user needs. And some of those projects were really successful and generated IP and became startups, and others may not have been, but there were definitely a lot of different opportunities for that cross-pollination. And then as we mentioned earlier, there was also accelerator and translational programs that were geared towards more supporting the faculty members as well. So I led the incubator program where people from the engineering school or from the medical school, as long as they had an affiliation with Duke, could rent space to be able to test things out on lab space that wasn't necessarily university space, but could be rented by the startup. So lots of different programs.
Yeah, that's great. And so when people, kind of walk through what a typical process would be in terms of, the incubators there at the schools, where, how does somebody, get into one of these programs? If they're an academic at the university, so there's a tie there. But if somebody's, oh, I have this great idea, or, oh, I want to do this, what's the best way to kind of start that process? Is it once, where in the process is it best to start reaching out to kind of these in-house, or incubators, or even then we could talk about incubators that are, not tied to the university. A lot of cities have incubators. I know here I'm in the Kansas City area, and we have several different ones. And so, that would be one, question for kind of any of you guys. When is it time to start reaching out for resources?
So for us, I would say that, if the innovator has a relationship with the university, is employed by the university, they should reach the tech transfer office, as soon as there's an innovation, just because if there's any intellectual property that needs to be filed, we would want that to be, really at the, taken care of at the outset. But we encourage our innovators to reach out to us as soon as possible. if there is someone who's interested in our incubation space, that would be more along the lines of they'd have to incorporate, they'd have to take an actual IP license or IP option with the university. But our space is highly discounted. The university has discounted the space upstairs by 75%. So they're really paying very affordable rent for wet lab space upstairs. And the idea there, of course, is we want our innovators and our startups to spend money towards tech development, not paying rent. And so they're able to stay here for up to 2 years.
I echo those thoughts as well from my experience leading the Bridge Incubator at Duke. Very similar setup.
So, Jennifer, for you, in terms of, do you see, because you're more out in the community, do you see that there's lack of resources? So if you're not, let's say, tied to a university, is it tough if you're an entrepreneur and you're out there to try to get funding? What have you kind of seen in terms of obstacles if you're maybe not tied to a university and have access to some of these types of resources?
Yeah, I think having access to those resources and the discounted rent space and being able to kind of productively use the funds that you do have is a really good advantage, because especially right now in the current economic environment, money is very, very hard to come by. So yeah, I would say in terms of roadblocks for folks that do not already have access to these university subsidized resources, just getting the funding and attracting investors and drawing people to invest in your startup is probably the biggest challenge before you even really start getting into any legal aspects where I would pick it up.
Mm-hmm. And so when you are talking with folks or counseling folks in terms of, where to start and where to start spending your resources, it's a different answer probably for each of you, but in terms of, because I know from a legal, like a private practice, I've worked with a lot of startups throughout my career. I know what I tell people in terms of resources and how to allocate resources. Is it, do you start the company, and then what are you putting into innovation? What are you putting into legal? What have you kind of, Jennifer, to start with, what do you see as a good allocation of resources kind of initially? What do you tell people when you're counseling them and talking to them?
Right. I think this, in a true lawyer fashion, is highly dependent on the exact circumstances of the startup or the founder, right? I mean, this may be an obvious first step, but creating your entity, I think a lot of times when I work with kind of individual founders or people who have an invention and want to create a company and they're doing a lot of things in their own name, is not really ideal. So it's pretty inexpensive and frankly pretty easy to create a legal entity. So if that hasn't been done yet, I would suggest that. But then the next steps kind of really depend on what is the, what's the end goal? And that varies from founder to founder. And so I find myself kind of asking this question up front a lot, which is, where are you trying to go with this? Are you hoping to start a company and scale that company and run that company? Are you hoping to develop your technology to a place where a strategic is going to buy it? Kind of what is your exit strategy? And then build determine how you're going to allocate your resources and what you're going to focus your time and money on, kind of moving toward that exit strategy. And I think it will be different depending on what that exit strategy is and frankly where you are and how crowded the space is. I have a lot of conversations with, startup founders who have spent a lot of time working on their technology, or they're starting with a cool technology, right? And they're not sure when's the right time to file a patent. Sometimes it is good to file patents early. Sometimes patents aren't really going to be the value driver. Sometimes it's your regulatory strategy that's going to be the value driver. And as much as it pains me to even say that as an IP attorney, sometimes it's not the IP that is going to attract investors or acquirers to your technology. A lot of times it is the IP, and then all IP is not created equal. So there is also that. So I think the conversation about how and where to spend your resources is largely dependent on what kind of technology you have, how crowded is the space, and really what's your exit strategy, and if you're intending to build something up or sell it, and then is there a regulatory strategy required? So if this is something that has to be cleared through the FDA, then, and in addition to that, a lot of times founders have this really cool technology or this really cool idea, but they don't think through what is the actual market for that technology and that idea. So like, who are your customers going to be? That should also kind of drive where you're going and where you focus your attention.
Just to Is it okay if I piggyback on that, Ella? I think those are really great points. And like for us, especially like incorporation, timing of the incorporation is so critical. So doing it too early is not necessarily the best thing, and it's something that we try not to encourage. I mean, we want our innovators to have a sense of where they're headed in terms of their market. And so doing that customer discovery ahead of that is oftentimes a great way to save money instead of chasing down different, different applications for a technology.
Yeah, I certainly see that too. We often get startups that come to us and they want a patent, right? Because that's the most thing that they see. It's what people talk about it on, Shark Tank or other kind of programs like that. It's always like, well, do you have a patent, and what is that? And so I do think there's a lot of counseling that goes into like, maybe this isn't the right time for a patent. Maybe this isn't the right technology for a patent. And then as a follow-up, what Liam was asking, what most common end goals do you see, Jennifer, from various founder profile types? Like what you see, and for any of you guys actually, what do you see as the end goals? Is it that people really want to start a company, build it, run it, commercialize it? Or do you see more your startups, people want to bring that to a certain point and then be like, great, let somebody else go and commercialize it, and I'm going to go do my new idea?
To be honest, I see it all over the place. And this is a question that frankly requires a lot of self-awareness, right? And not everybody has that, just being candid. I have talked to founders who know for sure that they want to build this up and they want to sell it to a bigger company in 3 years. And that's their timeline, and they're just trying to get there. I have talked to a lot of people who, they're so focused on this very cool idea and they see that it has a lot of applications. Like I think you mentioned, Chris, like they're like, this has applications in medicine, and it has applications in air travel, and it has applications, and it's like, oh, okay, but what, you're probably not going to do all of those, right? So sure, draft a broad patent, but then also you need to understand your market and your customer base, and is there even a need for this, and are people going to adopt it, and how does it fit into what's available already? So I have had conversations with single founders who are like, look, in my practice, I see a gaping hole here, and I want to develop this for my own use. And like, look, if I end up making $1 billion because I can commercialize it, great. But right now, I want to be able to preserve my ability to use it. I've talked to people, like I said, who know for sure that they want to build something and they want to cash out in 3 years so that they can get on to the next thing. I think in this space, in the medical space, it is often particularly if it's a practicing clinician, it's that they see an unmet need in their own practice, and they're mostly driven by wanting to develop the technology so that it is available to use, and kind of the commercialization of that is almost not an afterthought, but a secondary to their primary driver, which is, I want this to be created because I would like to use it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think a lot of clinicians come in with ideas and don't necessarily want to quit their day job to develop it, but and that's why they often looked for engineering collaborators that could kind of run with the idea, but that the clinician would still be able to have the involvement in the development and kind of seeing it through, but not necessarily be, the lead driving engineer. Or entrepreneur, sorry. So I think it's critical to be able to have a balance in your team, and whether you want to be the entrepreneur or, you have to understand that it has to be someone's day job to be able to get this, through and commercialized. and to, pull in all the resources that you need, that it can't just be kind of a side hustle when it comes to medical devices and pharmaceutical development.
I think I just will add a little bit there too. For us, like the whole medical device studio pilot that we ran last year was really great on a number of fronts. So we had, again, the 100K of each institution thrown in, and for 50K per project, we identified 4 clinicians projects to go from just napkin drawing to initial prototype. And so so one, we were able to support them with filing any patents related to that. We didn't actually use students. We hired, we looked for product design firms to actually do this on a professional level. And they were really enthusiastic to work with the university to get to initial prototype. We've already revealed 1, and we've got 3 more to go, which are coming out within a month or 2. We were able to then also use some of these medical devices in our business school class. So we've got Kellogg School of Business here at the university. And so there's a class that we have that is focused on medical device commercialization. And so, some of these went into the class, and then you have a team of MBAs or MD MBAs who kind of focus a whole quarter on looking at doing some market research, thinking of go-to-market strategy, and really leveraging that business, that business intel and bring it to the clinicians. But I think one of the questions, Chris, that you had asked, and I don't know if this is in a document or maybe it was a previous conversation, but where clinicians a lot of them don't have like MBAs, a lot of them don't have that business experience. And so knowing when to incorporate, knowing when to file patents, and I know that's not business related necessarily, but having that sense, knowing where do you even go to get like a prototype made? Or how do I even, how do I find investors? I mean, all these kinds of questions are things that I think our clinicians don't have experience with. So whatever we can do as a university to kind of help them identify those people or provide program, resources. That's what we try to do. Just for incorporation, for example, if we have a clinician or who is again part of the university and they incorporate, we actually have funds to reimburse them for their incorporation costs up to a certain dollar amount. What we're trying to do is just kind of lower the bar of the hurdle of getting products forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of generally, what improvements do you guys see that could be made? And maybe there's none in some and there's some in others, but in terms of the academic institutions and their startups, I mean, are you seeing that, let me ask that a different way. Are you seeing the startups that start up in, what kind of is the percentage of go to market versus it never works out? So you have somebody come in with an idea, with an innovation. What do you see in terms, and maybe maybe percentage isn't the right question, but what do you see in terms of those making it versus maybe those not making it? Either in the institution or in a different incubator. I don't know if you guys have a feel for that.
Well, isn't the percentage like 5% of all startups make it? I
don't know. That might be.
But so yeah, it's tough. I think we have a wall, actually a product gallery wall here, where we try to highlight those startups that have kind of either gotten a product into the market or has met some key, milestone like FDA approval, which doesn't mean that they've necessarily commercialized. So it's tough.
Yeah. Any other feel from you guys?
I don't have any specific numbers for Duke University. I think the Office of Translation and Commercialization could probably answer that question better. But I think on the improvement side, because that's kind of where you started out, I think one of the things that I noticed, at least on the medical device development side of things, is the regulatory gap. I think in industry, there's a lot of focus on kind of that regulatory strategy, but usually both on the engineering side and the physician side, the entrepreneurs weren't necessarily thinking about the regulatory as much, or maybe didn't have the resources internally, like within the university, to support that. So I think just putting more resources in the academic center to support medical device development on the regulatory end, and regulatory and quality. And actually, one university that does this really well is University of Utah. We reached out to them while I was working at Duke to be able to, their Center for Medical Innovation has kind of dedicated resources to be able to support entrepreneurs that want to get things through the FDA process while still within the university. So I think that's kind of an interesting concept. And I think more universities can maybe put resources into that. And that was definitely growing at Duke while I was there. I don't know the exact status of it now, but I think the regulatory resources are a huge hurdle that companies have to face. So I think it would be great to be able to do that and de-risk it within the university before the technology is spun out.
And I think what I would have to add to that from kind of the industry perspective is really following on what Fiolita said, which is when a startup comes to an industry partner and is trying to pitch their technology, and I guess let me preface this with, I think a lot of startups that fail, or even frankly, like more established companies that fail, are rarely failing because of the tech. The tech is usually interesting and cool and meets a need. They're failing because of, not having a well-defined business plan, or not understanding, what your revenue model is going to be, and kind of planning for that and spending accordingly. I think, learning how to spend productively and efficiently, especially startups, if you get a good influx of cash and you have money to spend, just like my recommendation there is still spend it as if you're at that tail end of that cash flow and things are tight. Because what I have seen happen over and over again in the companies that I've worked for is everybody's spending when cash is flowing, and then it suddenly gets tightened up and everything grinds to a halt when you're in a tougher environment. So there's that, like, being thoughtful and deliberate about what you're doing and what you're spending and how that is returning your investment from the outset, even if you do have a big influx of cash, is prudent. But when a startup, for example, if your goal is to be acquired or sell your IP or your technology to an industry partner, when they evaluate it, they are going to look at a couple of things. Number one is, like, how is their IP and how strong is your IP, and can they prevent other people from doing it? And two is going to be the regulatory strategy, particularly in med device. Med device companies like to use the 510K pathway. So because it's very expensive to go through the clinical trial process. And obviously that's different in pharma. Pharma typically uses the clinical trial pathway. But med device typically goes through the 510K pathway. So if the industry partner fails to see kind of what that regulatory pathway would be, or it's a new pathway that requires spending a ton of time doing clinical studies or gathering clinical data, and lengthens the amount of time it's going to be until they can have that product on the market generating revenue, that's not appetizing for most industry partners, unless it's like truly a brand new, completely disruptive technology, which even again, that's why innovation in med device is often incremental, because you want to have a predicate device that you can build on so that you can get your product onto the market. And I think a lot of times sitting on the committees within companies that review kind of these submissions of technology, the lack of a regulatory pathway is a very common reason why a company will pass, even if they think your technology is amazing and you have amazing IP. They'd have to be willing to invest that money. And so even if you haven't gone through the regulatory process, if you have thought through what the regulatory pathway is, that's very helpful for making your pitch to an industry partner in particular.
And so with that, there's a lot of resources out there in terms of like IP legal research, right? Or IP legal resources in terms of people that are willing to donate, some pro bono time, people that are willing to, depending on where it is. I mean, some of it is obviously legal paid fees. But in terms of that regulatory, is there any kind of resource that you've seen that's like, and let me give you an example. So I went to UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City, and we have, through their entrepreneur clinic, I do, some donation of time in terms of just talking through people thinking through some of their legal aspects when they're first starting up a business. Do you guys see any resources like that of attorneys that kind of on that regulatory side in terms of that FDA process or sitting down with somebody and thinking through their regulatory process? Are there, I just feel like there's a lot of kind of entrepreneur clinics out there that a lot of attorneys donate some time to. Do you see any of those resources for that regulatory process?
At Duke, there was an Office of Regulatory and Quality, and while I was leading the fast track medical device program, the technologies that were kind of past the proof of concept stage, we would set up a meeting with them, kind of review what we thought were good predicates, and they would do another review and give us feedback. So that was very helpful. I think, as I mentioned, the University of Utah has a dedicated program to be able to do that. I think more universities should grow that aspect and have office and personnel dedicated to supporting companies, similarly to how they review IP, looking at the technology from a regulatory, lens, and looking at indication for use, for example, and different technologies that are out there that are similar and that have gone through the process, I think would be critical, because it also highlights kind of the overall strategy for getting the project to market, like how much funding will need to go into, biocompatibility testing or whatever, depending on what needs to get done for that specific project. Is it a new material that's never been tested before? Is a clinical trial going to be necessary, or is it a common material where you can, kind of piggyback off of testing that has already been done? So I think that's very critical, and I think it would be a great resource for more universities to have.
I love that. I don't think we have that office, but we do have individuals who have come. Like actually, this afternoon we had a seminar with an individual. She's a consultant, and she has had like 30+ years in leading global teams from IND to NDA. So, and she's offering, office hours with our PIs for pro bono. So there are those kinds of opportunities, I think, available.
I'm not aware really of pro bono opportunities for people who are not affiliated with universities, but I do know that there are a whole lot of regulatory consultants out there who you can hire, who have, reasonable fees. They're usually very experienced regulatory professionals who have worked in industry for a long time and now kind of have their own consulting firm. I'm not aware of too many who will do that for free for a for-profit organization.
Yeah, I think, and that was a question that came up for the pro bono programs for non-academic medical device kind of startups. And I haven't seen any either. I just didn't know if you guys had seen any. But then one of the questions that has come in is talking about, in addition to academics and physicians, are you working with any nurse innovators? And I think that would probably be on the medical side, which I know, kind of in those medical schools or in the hospital itself, but didn't know if any of those folks had kind of come over into the incubators that you guys have worked in.
Nurses would be part of the medical center and the hospital, not so much the university, but we did have, I think we had a couple nurses who offered their napkin ideas to the medical device studio pilot that we had, and we were open to doing that so long as they were willing to assign IP to the university.
And Duke has a school of nursing. So actually no one came to my program specifically on the engineering side, but our design health program, I think, also had nursing students that worked with them.
And then in terms of licensing, so how do you guys see it most often in terms of a licensing deal? Does the university hold the IP or the in that terms, and then they license it to the startup, and then that gets spun out? Or do you guys see where there's entrepreneurs that go and get a license through, like a tech transfer office from a university, maybe do a license and then start their, incubator that way, or start their, their startup company that way? Do you see it? Is it mainly it starts within, for you guys, does it start within the university and then it can spin out at some point? Or is it that individuals are trying to get licenses from universities and then trying to start up their company? How do you guys obviously see it? It's going to be different.
I think there's probably a blend of both. From my experience and the startups that I've worked at, it's usually kind of faculty-based startups. So there's a faculty member at Duke University, has a cool technology, and then it's spun out. So the one that I work at right now, Resolute, the technology was started in Ken Gall's lab at Duke University. He's still a faculty member at Duke and at the engineering school, but Resolute is kind of, we've licensed our technology out of Duke and are developing it externally at this point. I think there's probably also entrepreneurs who seek out, specifically would go to Duke and say, hey, I want to look at what technology you have, or they're interested in something specific that they've seen some faculty member publish, and they license that out. I don't know what the breakdown is, to be honest, but I'm sure there's, there's both things happening, both types of innovations.
We have both also, probably more of the former, but it's interesting, actually, a number of, now that we have space at Northwestern, I think it's nice to have the space because it's a place for people to come. So we've actually had a number of alums from Kellogg actually come and try to engage with the university looking for opportunities. So yeah, both ways for us too.
And then I know, Jennifer, that you work on these types of licensing agreements. Are you seeing that a lot of it is the startups that you work with, are they licensing from universities, or is a lot of kind of homegrown technology from themselves, or is it a blend of both that you kind of work with?
I would say it's a blend of both. I think when we're talking about true startups, it's often the same pathway that Sonia and Violeta just said, where it's a person who is a faculty member at a university that has developed something cool in their lab and they want to spin it out into their own company. And so then we're negotiating with the university on the license terms for that spin out. I think the other way I have engaged, academic medical centers or universities from industry is, you become familiar with who's working on what in various labs around the country. And then, reach out to the tech transfer office and say, this looks interesting. We'd like to collaborate, or we'd like to engage and potentially license in this technology for us to further develop it. So I have done kind of more of that from my technology standpoint, but that's not really a startup, right? That's an established company who knows the space they want to work in, who reaches out to a university who has a good reputation or who has principal investigators who are well known in the field for those types of technologies. And so those negotiations are slightly different, right? I think when it's a faculty member at a university, it's, in both situations, it should be a win-win for both sides when you're negotiating the license agreement. And I think it should be approached that way. But a lot of times when it's a startup coming out of a university or a faculty member at a university, the negotiations are just a little bit easier, just because the university also wants to see their people succeed and go start companies. And so maybe the universities are slightly more invested in those situations, but they also want to see their technology commercialized in general. So in either case, it, like I said, should be a win-win for both the licensee and the university.
And then in terms of licensing deals, what are kind of from the inventor, entrepreneur, what are some of the bigger risks that you see when they're negotiating licenses, either with a university or even with, maybe a private company that they're going to, they're kind of licensing this technology to go maybe start up something. What, maybe it's in a field that company decided they didn't want to move forward in, they're moving forward in one area, but not in, they're moving forward in human health, but they don't want to move forward in animal health. And a person comes in and says, oh, I want to license this technology for animal health, something like that. What do you kind of see from your entrepreneurs, like when you're doing these license agreements? What are your big risks that you see legally for people to, or even business-wise, to consider?
I think it kind of goes back to what I said before about knowing what your end game is and making sure that your license terms support that. So, if you are very clear on your roadmap or what you're trying to do with the technology, it's easier to focus on the important terms of the license agreement, right? So if you know for sure that you want to start up a company, develop the technology, and then sell it to a large strategic, then when you are negotiating that license agreement, you kind of have to keep that what an acquirer would need or want in mind, so that the license agreement that you entered into isn't your deal killer, right? So you have to kind of focus on the terms that will be important for that. If that's not what you want, or you specifically do not want it acquired by an acquirer for whatever reason, then maybe you negotiate that differently so that it's less appetizing for an acquirer. People have reasons for doing that all the time, but I think going into a negotiation for your license, like being pretty well informed about what you need out of that, what is the scope of the license rights that you need is important, because if you don't, and then you don't negotiate for that on the outside, it only gets more expensive when you need to go back and get more rights, once you have developed something. But that's one risk I see. The other one is when you're, I guess, licensing with if you're taking that and then sub-licensing it, right? And it's a situation maybe where there's multiple applications of the technology, just making sure that you do either reserve your rights to pursue those multiple applications. Also, another kind of important one is making sure you have terms around what happens if your acquirer or your licensee decides to ultimately terminate that project, right? I have worked with many entrepreneurs who become frustrated that they have sold their technology or licensed their technology to a big strategic, and they're expecting this royalty stream on the back end, only to find out that the person who acquired it or licensed it exclusively decided not to proceed, and they've now shelved it. And so now you don't have an ability to pursue other acquirers or licensees, and you're not getting the benefit of those back end royalties. So that's the other big place where I think I see in negotiations where at the start of your negotiation, everyone's shiny and happy and wants to work together, and kind of it's your lawyer's job to envision what happens when you break up, which is not something that people typically like to think of at the engagement stage. But that is a big one, is what happens when the company doesn't do what they say they're going to do with it, or their plans change, or and then you kind of lose control of the direction that it's going.
Yeah, I see that especially as well in kind of the long-term licensing agreements, and what happens if whoever you're licensing it to decides to kind of not make that a priority. And like you said, Jennifer, you're expecting that kind of royalty stream. And so do you see a lot of those kinds of agreements with minimum annual royalties to kind of at least try to help that?
Yeah, or structure it differently, right? The acquirer is always going to want to push the consideration downstream. The person selling it's obviously going to push the consideration upstream, have kind of more of an upfront license fee payment. But I think just being aware of that, or at least putting protections around it, like if you have a large milestone payment coming for like the first commercial sale, for example, like put some time frames around that, put some deadlines around that. And if the deadline isn't met, then maybe the license drops from an exclusive to a non-exclusive, or some other mechanism for you to be able to go commercialize your IP or your technology if the first partner that you use for it decides either doesn't do it or their priorities change, which by the way happens a lot. I mean, sure, there are some acquirers who buy stuff just to take it off the market, which is not cool. But I think a lot of times when people are trying to partner, it's because they do have a vision and a roadmap for how they want to commercialize it. And then priorities change, things change, the economy changes, the market changes, things just change, and they may move away from it for completely honest reasons. But then going back to renegotiate again the terms, like to the extent that you can minimize the later renegotiations when circumstances have changed, the better. And it's obviously impossible to foresee every possible scenario, but just to kind of be aware in the background how you will feel about it if the person acquiring or taking a license to your technology doesn't ultimately use it or commercialize it, and how you might put in some protections during the negotiation for that.
And yeah, I mean, I think that's great. As much as you can get people to think about at any stage, I feel like of the journey of innovation, if you can get people to focus on that end, or what happens when whatever this particular relationship is going to end, is always important. And like you said, it's all bright and shiny in the beginning, and no one wants to think about the end game necessarily. One question I have, I know that, I'm in the Kansas City market. You guys are all in very different markets. Have you guys seen an increase in incubators generally that have come up either through other universities that are in the area, or, some of the private incubators or city incubators or regional incubators? Have you guys seen an increase in that in the recent years, or a decrease? Because I feel like we saw a really big increase, and then, kind of COVID and everything happened, and there was like a decrease, and some of them stopped existing. And then now I'm starting to see them come back up again. Are you seeing that trend? And then also a secondary question is, do you think there can be a saturation in the market for incubators or not?
So I could say in Chicago, we've definitely seen a huge increase. Even to the point where actually a commercial real estate developer decided to build a wonderful lab space just off campus. Maybe it'll be like, Kenmore Square in Cambridge. But yeah, I would say we definitely have seen a lot more. And I think it's been great in terms of a place for startups to land. Actually, the reason why the incubation lab, so we're called the Query Incubation Lab, and the history, just a little story behind it, is that several years ago, the state of Illinois had put out a call to increase wet lab space in the state because there was really not enough. And so with that, we applied for a grant, and we were awarded a Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity award of $3 million from the state, and the university had matched that. So it was with the $6 million that we were able to identify a university building and then just renovate 15,000 square feet in a building. And we were like on the first, fifth, and sixth floors. We just grabbed whatever space we could grab, but I think we were just trying to prove, the need of this kind of space at the university.
Yeah, I can echo the same thing. I guess in Durham and the Research Triangle, there's definitely been a growth in incubator spaces, and both wet lab space and just like office spaces as well. I think one thing that there's definitely a need for is like for more kind of really startups, kind of dedicated spaces rather than growth stage companies. There's definitely real estate developers that are building out, shell spaces for companies that are, in the 50 plus range. But when there's two scientists that just want a bench to test things out on, there's definitely a need for that type of space where you just kind of rent by the linear foot of bench space rather than, an entire lab.
That's so true. I mean, we have just to give you a sense, our startups can rent a lab that's about 650 square feet. And with the discount, we don't say subsidized because it's not subsidized, it's actually discounted by 75%. They pay about $700 for a month. So that's just like, when you go to places where I think it's like for 2 bench, it's like a couple of grand a month. So, I mean, that's been a huge asset, I think, to our founders. We also have like a little shared lab for life science startups. So we had surveyed our faculty and startups to ask, what are the critical pieces of equipment that you think you would need? And so with that, we purchased some used like freezers and biosafety cabinets and incubators and things like that. So that's available for free for our startups as well.
I'm not as close to it, but Southern California, as you might imagine, real estate is not cheap. And it seems just anecdotally like we have a lot of empty commercial real estate space at the moment. So I'm not sure it's really accessible to startups, frankly, just at the price point, but maybe it will become that way given the supply versus demand issue.
Or maybe there's a university that could take over some of that space and make it available. That would be, it's an opportunity somewhere for someone to think about. Do you guys think that there can be, too many of these kind of startup incubator, so people who are kind of starting up and trying to figure out what to do if they're not tied to a university? Do you think that there's possibly too many things out there that it makes it hard to know where to go? Or do you think the more opportunity, the better?
I think the latter. I definitely think we're definitely not at the stage of too many options. I think a lot of the startups that I worked with when I was at Duke, that was the place they could afford for the amount of grant funding that they had at the time. So I think it's very important to have these type of spaces, and if universities can afford to take over some of those, empty buildings and be able to provide that for researchers that are trying to translate technology that is being spun out, I think that would be great.
It's expensive. I mean, or even universities to take over. But yeah, I think finding, filling that gap that that Philia just talked about, the smaller spaces for our startups would be critical. Your question was, can we have too many? Is that what your question is?
Yeah. Is it possible to have too many? Or have you seen it?
There's so many different, before we had the incubation lab, I think looking for wet lab space, we were like scouring like the Chicagoland area for our startups. And it was hard to find. They were not very convenient. And we found some like they're dry labs, maybe some have wet labs, but some are just offices. So, it depends on the incubator. So they offer different flavors. But I think for us, I mean, we wanted to be, the proximity to the university was so critical. Maybe at the early stages, the proximity to the university campus is ideal. And then as they grow, going more downtown or away from the university is good.
Yeah, so I guess we're getting close on time, and so I didn't know if there were any other questions from the audience. I think we covered all of them as they came in. But in addition, do you guys think that the innovations that you have seen in your specific cities are people coming? Is it bringing people to the areas that you guys are in? Are you seeing that as people are coming in because they know of these, research areas and research centers? Do you guys see that people are coming? It's bringing, people into the cities, into your region because of these incubators and the startups and the things that your guys, you've seen at the universities?
I think that the universities that offer these types of resources can attract faculty who are interested in the entrepreneurial space. So you see a lot of growth. Kind of, it looks like it's within the university, but it's actually the university that's kind of the magnet that's bringing in, these faculty members that want to, not just publish, but get technology out. So I think there are, young faculty that are reviewing different universities and saying, okay, what do these universities have to offer? What do the regions have to offer? So I definitely think it's like the universities kind of serve as the catalysts for this type of innovation and bringing in and growing areas specifically.
Yeah, and I think even kind of outside investors or kind of private VCs and other people who want to invest in this area are attracted to areas where there's a large concentration of very high quality universities, just because that is the talent pool is right there, and it makes it easier to grab those people when they're coming out of their postdoc or whatever. It makes a lot of sense to have those be in the same geographical location as those large reputable university partners.
Yeah, and then somebody just asked, how do SBIR and STTR terms, how do those affect relationships between faculty startups and universities? So the small business innovation research and small business technology transfer programs, how are those affecting relationships between faculty startups and universities? If you have any thoughts on that.
So I think in early stages of translation, these incubator spaces within universities allow for that cross-pollination between. So even though a company has officially spun out, that proximity to the university will support that continued engagement and continued research development, which allows for, for these types of collaborative grant applications to go through. I think as companies kind of move out of the space, the university space, they probably apply more on the SBIR side and maybe don't have a subaward or look for subawards in different locations. So I think, having these types of incubators within universities will definitely increase the types of SBIRs, STTRs that are being put out there. I think it's a great program. We've definitely, several startups that I've been part of have applied to those types of programs and been successfully funded in that space. So yeah, I'm not sure if that 100% answers the question, but.
I think so. Well, I think we're at the end of our programming. I want to thank the three of you again so much for joining us today. I think it was really a great discussion, and we appreciate having you guys. And also for everyone who joined us, thank you. We hope the information was helpful. And as a reminder, this program has been approved for legal education hours. To report your hours, click the CEU icon on the bottom of the screen. A certificate of attendance, including course numbers, will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with a recording of the webcast. And just make sure I've covered everything. Be sure to complete, and please do complete our survey. We do use this feedback to plan future programs. We really do look at it, and we always appreciate that. But I don't think that unless there's any other questions, I think we're done. And thank you guys again so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.